up this morning with a bad hangover, and my penis was missing again.
So, we're getting a new Bubsy game. Yeah, everyone's talking about Bubsy, absolutely, and that there's nothing else coming out around the September 2025 period that people have their full focus on. No sir, not at all. By the Demon Turf devs, no less. One of the best platformers in recent memory. And the Bobcat is dubbed by none other than Kinger himself. It's quite surreal seeing one of the most mocked and reviled remnants of the 90s mascot wars still be here. Alive and kicking, sort of. People seem excited to finally play a game with this adorable absolute idiot that doesn't give you a headache. Well, most people. Some others are annoyed that we are getting a Bubsy game at all, instead of like a new Sly, Crash 5, a new Spyro, Jak and Daxter 4, Banjo 3, a proper Banjo 3. Almost as if the very act of making a new Bubsy game is actively preventing the production of the aforementioned. It doesn't, for your information. Fee. I'm sure the people over at Fabraz would love to make a new entry in one of these franchises. And believe me, Jak and Daxter is one of my personal all-time favorite games. I'd love it if Naughty Dog quit Todd Howarding The Last of Us and made a Jak 4. Same with Rayman. He's my boy, and the way he's been treated lately, well, less said of that the better. It appears to be that we might finally be back. But as I said before, Bubsy 4D existing has zero impact on whether or not other franchises are neglected. So this is just silly to me, even if it's probably just a joke. At least I hope so. Kinda hard to gauge these days. You know, if these complainers are genuine, it makes me wonder. In an era where many people are justly tired of remakes, reboots, and just nostalgia pandering in general, some people claim that it's better to remake things that weren't that good to begin with, instead of media that didn't need to be remade. And I agree. I think it only makes sense to at least be glad that Bubsy, of all mascots, is being given a chance to turn a new leaf. Because his games are mid. That's not news. He's never had a truly good game until potentially soon. Meanwhile, as much as I would love new entries in all of these franchises, every single one of them has had their moment. They have at least one game that's a classic of its era, and none of these games are going away. Hopefully. And a potential new installment isn't now impossible or any less likely than before. Plus, I just like to have more games with Anthro characters, considering that I'm a furry. If you somehow could not tell. So what better way to celebrate the occasion than to revisit the very source of Bubsy's highly implied PTSD and what's widely considered a slightly less painful experience than a colonoscopy down your day. Just for reference, I also played Aliens Colonial Marines and Superman 64, the former of which I paid with my own money. What little money 12-year-old me had. And I didn't mind either of them. Sure, they were bad to mediocre, but honestly I expected them to be much worse than I was made to believe. So I like to believe I have somewhat of a high tolerance when it comes to bad games. This game though, when I played it a few years ago, I survived for a few minutes and then had to drop it, because the visuals, controls, and audio were giving me the worst headache. But believe it or not, this was not my first exposure to this game. It was from an ancient review of sorts from way back when, and I remember seeing the gameplay of this game and just couldn't believe it. I refuse to believe that a game like this was not just made, but published. And I know what you're thinking. Typical Gen Z dum-dum with no attention span and thinks all games before 2003 look bad and horrible. Unk. Except that you'd be wrong. I've had an interest in retro games from a very young age. I had games like Mario 2, Castlevania 4 and Zelda 2 on my Wii Virtual Console, the latter of which proved to be the training that made me so good at Souls games. So no, I was well aware of how PlayStation 1 games look like. I even had a medieval hyperfixation. So even with all that context, I could tell that this game was doo-doo. Is that still the case? Well, let's find out. The story of the game involved Bubsy being stranded on an alien planet who's entirely populated by nerds who are also anti-furs, it seems, and so Bubsy has to try and leave this planet by building a spaceship. So this is technically the first video game adaptation of John Carpenter's The Thing. I'm not even joking, I'm serious. That's just the story, no reason to harp on it any longer. After all, story in a video game is like story in a prawn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important, as famously said by John Valjean. So, especially with the hindsight of the angry reviewer era being, well, not as great as we originally thought in our naive youth, back when we thought the Slender Man was scary, and that Justin Bieber was the worst thing that could possibly happen to anybody. Innocent times. Could it be that Bubsy 3D is a misunderstood gem? A game that was unfairly criticized and dismissed, whose flaws were insinuated for views and clicks. Does it deserve the Star Wars prequels treatment and be vindicated in the eyes of the public? No, it's still bad. It was an awful game back then, and it sure is right now. I mean, what hasn't been said about this game already? I think the fact that the new re-release has an analog version of this game says a lot. Now, I am personally a tank control defender. I don't know why people complain about tank controls in the Resi games, which I'm a big fan of if you didn't know. Nah, fuck GTA 6, if I'm ever getting a PS5, it will be for Requiem. Shit looks fire.
Oh god, don't make me go down there again, there's a giant killer Weetabix.
But anyways, I think tank controls work perfectly well with fixed camera angles and are a much better alternative than full analog. I'll take moving like a Renault FT if it means I don't have to reset my stick every time I go in a new room. All that being said, Resident Evil is a survival horror, and Bubsy is a platformer. Don't let George Wood gaslight you. Resi and Mario are not comparable.
The game is virtually impossible.
The game feels horribly stiff, since you can only move right in front of you. You can strafe, but, well, it's not the best movement. This wouldn't be a problem if this game was a more slow-paced puzzle platformer. But no, they expect you to do some real Mario 64 speedrunner stunts and fight enemies with hard-to-see bullets. You have to jump on them, and honestly the hit detection isn't so bad, but then again, the controls make that easier said than done. Again, feeling stiff in a scary game makes it scarier. That's good. Feeling stiff in a genre that's built upon responsive movement and fast pace, that's bad. This is like playing Mario Galaxy with Prince of Persia controls. As in the original Prince of Persia. What I find really weird, however, is that this game's controls are very similar to Jumping Flash. The controls are near identical down to the camera focusing downwards when you're up in the air. Here's the thing though, Jumping Flash is awesome and has aged amazing. Take it from me, while Bubsy 3D was the digital equivalent of a war crime back then, and time has not been kind to it. And this is not a coincidence, apparently they used the Jumping Flash as a blueprint. So what happened? Basically, this isn't what I'm doing here. I don't want to make the umpteenth Bubsy bad, Bubsy annoying video. As true as that may be. Rather, I want to know why this control scheme works here, but not here. Having played these games back to back, I can say that what jumps out of me is that Jumping Flash is much smoother. And again, this is despite having a similar control scheme. Robbit, the bunny robot in the game, can jump really, really high, and his movement is much faster than Bubsy. So if there's ever a stiff moment, you don't linger on it, because the game has a really quick pace, on top of having slower enemies and a gun. Also, Jumping Flash is much more visually appealing. Speaking of which, the graphics. They're bad. Really bad. I've mentioned the graphics earlier on, but it's worth repeating. This is abhorrent. Jumping Flash would look excellent in a Y2K fan edit. Bubsy 3D looks like a game dev student's final project. A game dev student that had to reset like 5 times. Now believe it or not, I can actually see what they were going for here. I think the main inspiration for the art direction were the more outlandish Looney Tunes shorts from the 1950s, mainly Duck Dodgers. Suddenly some things like the odd shapes, asymmetry, fast open spaces, sound effects and saturated colors start to make sense. But much like a beginner artist, saying that it's a stylistic choice only goes so far, and doesn't explain, say, the lack of textures. Which surprisingly enough, we have the reason why that is. Apparently the development of the game was a mess, unsurprisingly, and they were so focused on making the game world render a vast area that they realized too late that there wasn't enough space for textures. So, did you know that Bubsy was nominated Best New Character in the 1993 issue of the famous video game magazine Game Fan? Granted, there were only 5 people who got to pick it, and he won by 50% against Sparkster and Aero the Acrobat. Oh, how has this Lil Scrunko failed to beat Crash and Mario and tie. You know, despite this game being what it is, terrible, I feel bad bashing it too hard, because nobody really actively sets out to make a bad game, or work of art in general. The developers themselves were fully aware of Mario 64, and their limitations, but they just had to soldier on. My sentiments are more akin to pity than anger. Sometimes our vision just doesn't pan out, and that's usually fine if it's on your own terms and decide to not share what you made. But when you have someone pushing you for a finished game in time for a release window, well, it can really sting. Yo, what if they had a Bubsy skin though?